Yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the National Curriculum, the live audio podcast / downloadable podcast defined by two things. One being the place where you can discover what the rest of football media's opinions will be in 2 weeks, and a place that is also defined by our incredible humbleness. Absolutely. My name is Joey Lynch. Thank you for joining us, and it is my great pleasure to be joined going around the room by Channel 10 commentator extraordinaire, Teo Pellizzeri. Teo, how are you?
Well, not for the last 2 days. I'm hoping too many more dollars don't go flying out of my pocket, but let's try and keep this boat on the water, shall we?
Indeed, and also joined by the Hellraiser himself, Ante Jukic, back now in Geelong after being in Amy Park for today's A-League of Women. Ante, how was the drive?
It was nice. A very leisurely drive back to Geelong. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and wishing everyone all the best and good vibes.
And indeed. And then also joined by News Corp and Football Nation Radio's Nick DeBarno. Nick, anybody swipe right?
Grazie.
I'm just not going to say anything anymore about this sort of stuff because we just become the butt of the joke. But yeah, good to be here. Good to be here. And no, the conversations did not come up as a conversation starter on New Year's Eve either. So we'll just leave it at that.
Cannot believe the opening line of "Yes, I have a podcast" just doesn't have them lining up on the socials. But what are we going to do?
It's so much out of context there, Joe.
Yes.
I feel like I need to dig these conversations up and show screenshots or something. I don't know. I don't know how to put this down.
That will just make it worse, Nick, if you do that. Just lead into it. But yes, it has been a week of upheaval and chaos across Australian football. A number of games cancelled in the A-League women's competition. All but one of the games on tap for this weekend cancelled in A-League men's, but we did get one off on Saturday night in the city of Churches. It was Wellington Phoenix 0, Adelaide United 4, getting their first win of the season. We'll get to the devastating blow to the National Curriculum podcast that emerged after that game in a little bit. But firstly, the game, I'll throw the floor open to anybody. I'm looking at the scoreline. Adelaide 4. Are Adelaide back? Is Carl Viet at the wheel?
No, it's getting to the stage where the Phoenix are the get-right game that every team will be looking at the fixture hoping to have next, unfortunately. And Ollie Sales' replacement was fine, I thought, but telling that in a game where Adelaide had to opt for their fourth choice keeper, that Wellington didn't test him at all. And I'm sure Ante will have the numbers and the evidence as to why they didn't test him. But just purely watching this game casually on Saturday night, this was a real low for Phoenix. Some Twitter Phoenix fans are starting to ask questions about Ufuk Talay, and I think the New Zealand journos are saying this is now a low watermark. But I'm not going to dig too deep into the how and how it got to this point for Wellington, but I'm not buying any Adelaide stock off the back of this. At least they repaired their goal difference to a degree.
Well, I mean, Ufuk Talay, we're talking about the low watermarks, and unfortunately for the Phoenix, there's been quite a few low watermarks over the years for the New Zealand-based franchise. But, I mean, Ante, Teo has set you up there on a platter. Is Ufuk Talay the problem there at the Knicks, or is this a case of circumstances, yet another year away from home, cooped up there in Sydney, unable to see friends and family? Is this the downfall that was inevitably going to happen regardless of what Talay did?
I don't know. I think it seems to be all like a combination of multiple factors in this one. On the surface, like I was pretty high on Wellington coming into this season, but the one thing that really struck me last night was how big of a loss Piscopo is, and it just there were difficulties or susceptibilities with Piscopo in the team. They do have players to come back, but I don't think. What I will say is I don't think it transforms the nature of their play. It might help them in situational terms, But yeah, I think there was a bit to really. There was a bit that was illuminative last night with respect to how Tale responded to having to chase the game. Putting Laws in midfield from halftime was really interesting. Pretty sure he had to see a minute, although he was kind of behind the eight ball coming into this season. Did have an interrupted preseason, but the fact that he hasn't seen a minute, especially in situations where Wellington can be chasing games and chasing results, like I said, is very illuminative.
I mean, it's difficult to tell with the Knicks, with all the troubles they've had, all the player departures they had as well, which one can arguably point to the circumstances they find them in as the reasons for that. I mean, specifically Stephen Taylor, their nominal captain and bedrock in defence. As soon as he realised that, no, I'm going to have to spend another year overseas, he's just packed his bags and left off. And I think, Nick, that really has left a gaping void in the Knicks backline, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. I was just running over some stats now, and I was amazed to see, not only because obviously when you get your actual scoreline and you look at the XG doesn't usually marry up, especially in a smashing like this, but Adelaide actually underperformed their XG in this game. Adelaide, from per FOTMob, 4.93 was their XG for that game. And I think that says a lot, not necessarily about Adelaide going forward, but a bit about Wellington defensively. And they've conceded 14 goals this season. They've got the worst defense in the league. And you mentioned the Stephen Taylor departure. And there's a gaping hole in there. They, as you said, they moved Josh Laws into midfield. Didn't really pan out. They had Callan Elliott and McGarry at fullback, Tim Payne at centre back. And poor Alex Paulson between the sticks, first game, baptism of fire. Adelaide, for all the problems they have in midfield, they had it their own way in that final third because of the work of a certain Bernardo. He was very impressive on the right-hand side. I would have loved to have seen if we'd gotten that combination of Bernardo and Ben Halloran going forward, but we're not allowed nice things down here in the A-Liga. So it was almost a sense of, it was too good to be true, the thought of having, Ben Halloran maybe playing as a 10 and Bernardo on the right, or Ben Halloran leading the line, even on the left-hand side. We know he wouldn't drop Craig Goodwin, but, I mean, there was always that possibility. But in terms of the Wellington backline, there are concerns. You're conceding 14 goals already at this point of the season, another 4 goals yesterday, and you're conceding an XG of, 4.93 from 23 shots. That's concerning. That's concerning, especially going into a team of Adelaide that weren't creating a lot of chances going into that game, and good chances at that as well.
The thing is, just quickly on the XG, I saw a graphic with that, and I decided to keep it in reserve for the chat tonight rather than put it into the group chat that we're in preparing for the show. Because did 4.93 seem like it was a bit of an excited count due to death by 1,000 cuts from the sheer volume of low-quality chances that Adelaide spammed through the course of the game? Because normally when you see 4.93, you expect the score to be 7 or 8-0. You don't expect a team to not outscore their XG when it's 4.93.
What I'd be really intrigued, I'll go through this tomorrow morning, but I'm really intrigued to see what Adelaide's open play XG was and the quality of those shots.
I've got it
because what's their open play XG?
So 2.19 is the open play XG, 1.57 from penalties. Obviously, they did score a penalty, and 1.16 from set pieces.
Yeah, because they had a lot of, apart from apart from their first goal coming from that situation, it's like they have a lot of, it's almost like this illusion of threat, essentially. And it's a low percentage kind of thing when it comes to dead balls. Like, because how many corners, for example, will eventuate in goals or chances of high quality? Adelaide, last night's game was weird in the sense that Adelaide didn't look great, yet won 4-0. As weird as that sounds, but Wellington didn't really deserve any less already. Wellington, they seemed hopeless last night. And that was the one thing that really struck me without Piscopo. And especially after this, after half time and the changes he made, it's like it really raises the question what Tale thinks the problem is.
Well, just on that, so the decision to sub Rufer at halftime and bring on Nicholas Pennington, I keep calling him Chad, but Nicholas Pennington.
The Chad.
Now, I don't know how much.
Chad is great.
Now,
Miami Dolphins legend Chad Pennington.
We all use FOTMob. I don't know how much stock you guys put in their player ratings, but his ratings so far have been 6.1, 0.5, 0.3, 0.4. And again, the Kiwi journos aren't convinced that he's a starting answer, but I'm not convinced that Rufer and Lewis is a midfield combination that's going to be able to create you anything, and exacerbated by Piscopo not being there. There's a bit of sameness to both of them, but it seems as though Rufer is more determined to play his position, meaning Lewis is the one who has to venture out of his comfort zone and try stuff. And I think that actively makes him look worse because he's the one that is actually trying to force forward passes and force the play.
If there's anyone that I'm not necessarily convinced on, it's Ben Old. And I haven't really been impressed. And the fact that they were having to play David Ball as one of the attacking midfielders is like it's happened a few times this season already where he's played as one of the attacking midfielders instead of one of the two forwards, and it just hasn't worked. And that's kind of what raises really significant questions as to why Pushaw was signed to begin with, and what, like, with respect to Pushaw, like, one, what's the motivation behind signing him if he's just there to carry the bags for everyone, and two, why doesn't Talai feel at this point that he's deserving of any minutes, let alone a start, in comparison to players like Old? It can get ugly very quickly in football, and I'd say Tala is hoping for some players to come back.
Well, we know that they still have the Mexican, is it Gael Sandoval?
Yeah.
The 10 to come in. Talaya has mentioned, I think, maybe some other signings coming in January, now that he knows for a fact that they will remain in New South Wales for pretty much the entire A-League season, which means they can go out to future signings and give them at least some sort of concrete information about what they are actually signing up for. I think it's interesting with Tale. Tale, he signed a 2-year contract extension ahead of this season, so he is nominally tied to the club till the end of the 2022-23 season. And I don't see, no matter how bad it gets for the Knicks this season, I don't see the Knicks being the ones to try to end that relationship with Tale, especially after some of the success. Now, whether Tale decides to move on or the Knicks decide to maybe not fight as hard the next time mainland Australian side start sniffing around Tale, that's another question. But you're talking about Pershaw getting minutes, aren't they? Wellington, just checking Football Reference, they are, in terms of age weighted by minutes played, they're the youngest team in the A-League so far. In the A-League men, Cookie Dollar in the Swear Jar, they are the youngest team in A-League men this season, in front of Central Coast and Brisbane, an average age of 25 years, 0.2. So ostensibly there could be scope for growth. This could be an instance of some young players taking some lumps, and forging mental toughness in the years ahead and maybe sorting the wheat from the chaff. But yeah, it's not looking very good right now for the Knicks, which is, it's disheartening in the sense that no matter where you fall on, the Knicks Kiwi franchise being in the A-Leagues, it's disappointing for the players and staff that have effectively sacrificed 2 years of their lives away from home, away from family, and just effectively had their entire lives uprooted simply so this competition could still function. That's something that's disappointing. You would love to see them going better purely because of that, but I can't see a way it turns around at the moment.
Just a quick point. I think that in terms of Ufuk-Talay, I think the whole situation of being on the road would actually work in his favour if they had another season outside the finals. He's contracted next year, and I think that they'll honour that contract and they'll think, well, you know what? Let's give him one full season in New Zealand and see what happens. Because it is a bit of, I hate using the word cop-out, but it's a way of kind of going, yeah, look, you know what? Let's go for next year when we can actually bring players in that are going to want to live in New Zealand, that know there's a bit of certainty about where they're playing, having everyone at home. It's obviously, as you said, Joey, it's bloody difficult being on the road if you're in a hub, or in this situation, especially being in another country, having to play out an entire season. I think they'll give him that extra year, as well as you mentioned with the young squad. So I'll be very curious to see if that changes, if the results worsen, but I get this sense they'll at least give him next season.
But even if they weren't, would they be willing and capable to pay him out?
That's a different question altogether because of financials. So
because I think that's, and with Wellington, how much of that, or let's say the constraints that they work within financially, impact their let's say transfer strategy and their squad composition? Because that was something that really struck me about local commentary with respect to Wellington. They find them to be an academy team. There are players there that should be given some degrees of faith, and this is something that we've always talked about. It's fine to give young players minutes, but what kind of young players are being given minutes? And that's something we'll get to understand more and more with Wellington this season, I believe.
Yeah, what kind of young players are getting minutes, and what responsibilities are they being given with the minutes that they have? What scope are they actually given to affect games by their coaches? But moving on, of course, we must acknowledge the disaster for the national curriculum pod that was revealed by Carl Vietz post-game. The news that Ben Halloran, Comrade Halloran, is set to leave Adelaide United immediately. He is departing for worst Korea, South Korea, and signing with an unnamed side in the K-League.
Believed to be Busan iPark. That was one of the rumors that came up from an English-speaking Korean football podcast host. Can't remember the name. I'll look it up. I'll give him the credit.
The other team is also linked is FC Seoul. That was on a certain FTBL just as well. So there's two teams, I guess. But let's see. Who are we going to trust?
Both capitalist dogs, all the same. But look, you can't have too much of a good thing in the R-League, I mean. But with respect to Halloran, it's a rational move at this point of his career. He's 29. He's been, since day one, basically, he's been Adelaide's most important and most consistent player in that regard. He's played multiple positions. And however much, let's say, with players like Halloran, they might not, let's say, jump off the page or jump off the screen, but their level has to be taken into account, that the collective relies on them to function. And that was one thing that really struck me, going back, let's say in 2019, the last games he missed. I remember us all in the box. Sorry, Teo. It was Joey and Nick and I. We were all in the box, and we were watching Adelaide without Halloran that game at Marvel against Victory, and just how aimless they were. And I remember thinking, like, the next game against Western, like, they were going to get, like, it was going to be ugly, because that was a game with Pasquale coming in, with Burgess and Diamante in front of him. But yeah, like, it's unfortunate to not get to watch Halloran anymore in this league, but it's a good move for him. It's you can top up the super at 29. Why not?
Pretty much.
If I can give credit. So the journalist was called Paul Neat, sports editor for Airang News in West Korea, and also the managing editor of K-League English. But he then deleted the tweet after it was quote tweeted by our friend of the pod, Paul Williams. So maybe Nick's mail is better than mine via Mr. Neat.
I don't know. It feels like there's so much random rumors and stuff that comes out of the K League and all of that. So apparently, Jamie McLaren was briefly off to the K League for about 24 hours last week.
I think it's also, if you're like a Dan Orlovitz who basically has, you know, a monopoly on English speaking news out of Japan, if you have a monopoly on English speaking news out of Korea, what you say is going to go a lot further than you know if he was moving to, say, a different English speaking country.
This is true. This is true.
Absolutely.
Anyways, so we have discussed in great detail the one A-League men fixture that was able to take place this weekend. Hopefully, we will be able to get a few more games out of the way.
Well, can I just say,
ahead.
I was down to do Sydney-Perth today, so I am spewing because that would have been a high-attention game with potentially Sturridge. And, of course, I've only done Sydney FC men's 3 or 4 times over the 5 years I've been in the mix. So, shattered to lose that one this afternoon.
Well, what we did lose in potentially Teo being the one to go worldwide on Daniel Sturridge's first A-Liga goal. We did get a few A-League women's games out of the way. Of course, those also not going across fully. We had a couple of cancellations, but today we had Katrina Gorry masterclass as Brisbane Roar came from behind to defeat Melbourne Victory. Some might argue a free-falling Melbourne Victory 4-2 today in the Sunday game. Yesterday, we had another 4-2. Adelaide United downing Perth Glory, finally returning to action over there in Coopers Stadium. And before that, we had, well, it feels like we're picking on Wellington at this point because they went down 5-0 to Sydney FC in the Phoenix's home away from home in the Gong. And I think I'll go to you first, Teo, because you called that game, the Phoenix versus Sydney. And one thing that really stood out to me from that game, and I'm going to put you on the spot with this, that you, during your research for the commentary for this game, you pretty much picked exactly how Sydney could score against the Knicks. And what happens? That is how Sydney scored against the Knicks.
Yes, well, here's the thing. Like, some people replied to my video saying, "Oh, great analysis, well done." And I'm like, well, guys, I didn't actually solve any problems. I just identified problems, and then the coaches are the ones that get paid to solve these problems. And the reason I only focused on the Phoenix's defending is because there is no sample size of their attacking to work with. I mean, it is really just a matter of, can you keep a clean sheet? And in a league where goalkeepers are literally throwing the ball into their own nets, the Phoenix must feel as though they've missed out here because they can't even have the territory to cause a mistake. So, look, I jinxed this. First thing I said at the start of the second half was to reel off the 3 highest victory margins of victory in an A-League women's game, which were 11-0, I think 11-1 and 10-2. And, of course, after that consigned the game to having no more goals. But unfortunately, neither of the videos have been uploaded to any platform, either the clubs or the club's own websites or Keep Up. Hopefully they will appear at some point. But the 2 post-match interviews were the most fascinating thing to come out of this game. Ante Juric, the Sydney FC coach, said after the game that his substitutions were motivated by adjusting for the players he expects to lose for the Asian Cup. And the first player he subbed off was Ali Green at left back, replacing her with Angelique Christodoulou. Then he switched his fullbacks as well. So I thought that was a great insight, as Nick's cat wants to interrupt and have a say.
Hello, darling.
But also, then there was an interview with Wellington centre-back Mackenzie Barry, who had a pretty torrid day, but had been excellent the game before against Newcastle. And her and Kate Taylor have kind of exchanged who's the better centre-back, as they just get absolutely no protection from their midfield and have to repel everything. Anyway, I thought her mentality and her attitude was really good in the sense that it was positive, but without any phoniness, without any sort of toxic positivity. It was entirely sincere and it was entirely believable. So I think that it shows that the Phoenix will be ready to beat a team on an off day. Sydney FC wasn't that team. Quite simply, their first team is too deep, especially in the midfield and the attacking third. And it's just too competitive. I mean, it was Rachel Lowe's first start, having to come on as a sub for 4 games in a row. And she played exceptionally well because opportunities are so limited in the attackers and the midfielders for Sydney.
Well, it was a very good day for Sydney, Teo, except perhaps in one regard, as our commentary friend mutes himself as a plane goes over his apartment there in the harbour city. God, Teo, why would you ever move away from Melbourne? I ask, knowing that he's on mute and cannot respond to that. But the big story that did potentially come out of that game as well was the potential broken foot to Sydney FC captain Natalie Tobin, which could potentially shape as significant not just for the fate of the Sky Blues, but in fact the A-League Women's as a whole, bearing in mind, of course, that Sydney FC are already down one starting centre-back after Ellie Brush suffered an ACL injury at the beginning of the season. And I think we touched on it before, one only needs to look at the state that Melbourne Victory has found themselves in, absence their starting centre-back and captain Kayla Morrison, to see what these injuries can do, not just to a side's defence, but the entire balance and structure of the side in front of them as coaches are forced to adapt. Teo, I guess the question is, do you think Tobin potentially being out for the season with a broken foot will have the same sort of impact as Morrison going down for victory, or what impact do you think it will have on the title race?
Briefly, I think that Victory and Sydney are both very lucky that they're the two teams with resources to find someone if there is someone to be found. I know that we all got led a merry dance by rumours of Victory having an Italian defender in quarantine, which turned out to be not true and a ruse, but I think we all bought that. And I'm not going to tip at everyone who bought it, but it wasn't just people in this chat or even involved in TNC.
Even my immediate family bought it.
We all bought it.
It was me, Austin.
Yeah, well, it certainly well, it certainly wasn't the Italian defender all along. And I think so for Sydney, they can put Jessica Nash in the middle, they can put Ali Green in the middle, they can play Angela Christodoulou on either flank. But the bottom line is they have the resources to go and get a guest. Victory have far more incentive to go and find a guest because their problems are more pronounced. But then I look at a team like Newcastle, who know they're losing Emily Van Egmond in a couple of weeks, and they aren't going to dip into their resources and find another player to come in. So what they might have to do is rob Peter to pay Paul and move Liz Eddy from right back into midfield and then adjust their defence accordingly. So I think the teams that are currently afflicted are probably, along with Melbourne City, the two most capable teams of finding someone, if there is someone who can get their arm twisted, to come to Australia to do whatever quarantine they may have at that time. But I also think Sydney only have 2 foreigners in their squad, so they've got the space to do whatever they please if they can pull it off. But even if they don't, look, Tobin is a big loss from a leadership and a seniority point of view, because now I think only Kote Rojas and Paige Satchel are their only 2 players over the age of 23. But I still think they can make it work with the players that they've got in their squad.
I guess the question for me now becomes, they didn't actually play on the weekends due to a number of COVID cases amongst the team, and hopefully those resolve themselves and the players get healthy as quickly as possible. But the doors are suddenly opening and the field is sort of clearing for Melbourne City to start to seriously think about staging a proper push for the title. I think most people would have had them there or thereabouts in the finals race at the beginning of the season. They clearly weren't going. They were clearly going to improve on last season's squad based upon growth from some players, bringing in other players such as Hannah Wilkinson and Rebecca Stott. But having seen them play over the first weeks of the season and knowing that it is a side that is going to get better as the season goes on. Just because that's what seemingly Melbourne City does every single season in A-League Women's, and B, because this is a very young new side that will become more and more comfortable in Kotorado Vidicic's system as the season goes on. I genuinely think that it is not out of the realm of possibility that we start talking about City as title contenders, maybe not to the same degree as Sydney FC, but certainly alongside Melbourne Victory.
It's putting it lightly.
They're
They're stronger than Victory.
Yeah, I think Rado's recruiting may have upset me as a parochial Victorian who wanted to see locals get a go, but he's going to be vindicated because Caitlin Torpey and Letitia McKenna and Winona Heatley are all going to look like masterstroke signings. Even Misha Westland, if she gets over her current injury. And we talk about the Phoenix. He's got Marissa Vandermeer, who, in theory, is ahead of every player Wellington signed because City signed her before they even knew Wellington was coming in, and she hasn't even made the bench yet. So, I think that City will be vindicated for their off-season signings, assuming Wilkinson stays fit up top.
That is a big one, though. That was something actually that was really. Are we going to talk about last week's games? Actually,
I mean,
the ones over Christmas.
Which game would you like to talk about, Mr. Jukic?
No, I was about to talk about the City and Victory game.
Well, that was the last.
That was
the last game City played. That was the last game City played. So go for it.
That was the last game City played, and they were
really good.
You could see how that game was going to go within a minute, within the opening couple of minutes of the game, and hearing after a press conference, I really shouldn't be saying this, but City's coaching staff knew as much. They knew that Victory were not only there for the taking, but they were going to be given quite the drumming.
Well, I wanted to ask you, Ante, for your thoughts on Matilda Mcnamara, because Georgie Omandale and I were both sold that she is of a level that should be, at least in Matilda's camp, to be assessed how she looks alongside other international players. And we're doing it off a very small sample size of only 4 games, but all 4 of them have been really sensational. And this is probably the product of someone who had to wait until they were 18 to get their debut rather than coming in at 15 or 16. But I'd love your thoughts on where you think she might stack up as a really late bolter for the Asian Cup.
Sorry, that word just makes me very
bolter.
Very warm.
I chose my language very carefully. I know the power. I know the
you
power
know
of the
power of the word bolter. But look, outside of McKenna, personally, I think it's a bit early. But to see players like McKenna and even Chinama it was a cool moment seeing Chinama come on and basically playing against one of the players who has to train her on a daily basis at Maribyrnong Sports Academy in Polydoran. That was actually a really cool moment. But I think City, they know it's not just that they're stronger than Victory, but they know they're stronger than Victory. And I think that's going to be something that is going to be very interesting as the season goes on. I'm of the agreement that a lot of it will depend on Wilkinson staying fit, because you think about how not just where the majority of shots are coming from, but how they generate those shots collectively. Wilkinson is very important in that respect. But yeah, it's not so much that I'm so keen on Victory, so keen on City, but I'm very cool on Victory.
I mean,
irrespective of the circumstances that play into, let's say, the strength of their squad, which was also evident today. I personally don't believe that they have the capacity to defend their title this year.
Well, I think we'll touch on Victory and Aurora in a sec, but I also did want to add, we're talking about this. I mean, Rebecca Stott has been spoken about a lot as a figure of inspiration this season, rightly enough, but she is also rapidly becoming a key cog in that City side. She's been moved into a defensive midfield position this year from centre back, and you can see the stabilizing presence that she brings to City when they are defending and when they are attempting to play out from the back and break. She knows what positions to get in, and she knows how to provide a release outlet for the defense. And I think also something that will only be magnified as the season goes on, both as she develops match fitness and gets further away from chemotherapy. She is just a bigger body than most of the rest of this A-League women's competition.
Van Egmond speak. And so however much she's not, from a standpoint of play, she's not extraordinary. She's not, so massively transformative, but she's able to just get the team up the pitch.
She does her job.
She can get the team up the pitch, and that's something, especially in moments of duress, when she has to, let's say, she doesn't really have to wriggle out. She can just muscle her way through, essentially, and then get the ball, let's say, out wide, and City like to attack through those areas in initial phases. But she's impactful. She's effective, and it's however heartwarming it is to see from a personal standpoint on a footballing basis. It's effective.
I mean, well, moving on to the game that we witnessed today. Initially, it all appeared to be going so well for Melbourne Victory, going up 1-0 thanks to one of the more disastrous own goals you will ever see on a footballing pitch, men's or women's. Just a cacophony of errors leading into that one. And then Lynn Williams, not sure how much she actually knew about it, but scoring her third goal of the A-League women's season when she bundles the ball over the line with her chest from a big pack forms. Ball comes down on top, and it's Williams from an Amy Jackson corner. But then really, Raw get one back through another goalkeeping error, which seems to be an emerging trend in the A-League women's this season, as Teo touched upon. Melissa Mazel's spilling a Katrina Gorry long ball, Crummer pouncing on the rebounds, and then Kyra Cooney-Cross, red card. I'm going to assume that all of us here in the chat agree that it was a red card, the studs up to the ankles. And from Teo, you perhaps think it was a yellow?
I'm still clouded by what Sarah Carroll did to Paige Hayward yesterday, only being a yellow. And and I know that there's been some Twitter chat about how you can't compare game to game, and you've got to have it within the context of that game, and also the context of it being Larissa Crummer, who has had a horrendous run with injuries as well, who was the player on the receiving end. Put it this way. If VAR was in A-League Women's, I don't think they would have overturned the referee's decision. So it's within the frame of it not being. I wouldn't have given a red card, but it's also not a clear and obvious error. That's what I would say.
It's more an overcompensation from Cooney-Cross. The fact that she has to lunge in the way that she does, it's not necessarily premeditated or malicious in terms of intent. But it was. The more and more I watch of Cooney-Cross in midfield, the more I do not see the hype.
Can we can come back to that, because I have a point I'd like to make when we get into what's wrong with the Victory. But Nick, yellow, red. Were you giving a red?
I'm going yellow. I'm going a red. The studs are up for me. Every time the studs are up, it's a clear red card for me. As you said, Teo, VAR, you can't overturn that. End of the day, when I saw it at first glance, I'm like, okay, what? That came out of nowhere. But once you looked at the replays 3 or 4 times, you're like, okay, I see it. And take into context. But one small thing, I just wanted to ask a question. This is more for Joey and Ante, because you guys went today. Ante, what was your reaction in the box when Gorry lined up from distance and scored that absolute peach? Because
mine was horror as somebody filing inside 90 minutes for AAP, facing the prospect of yet another We can swear on this, right? Yet another fucking rewrite. Mine was of absolute horror. That's what my reaction was.
No, but I'll tell you, like, was there like a scream? Was it like a whore? What was it?
Yeah, see, my let's say shock was more with respect to the Cooney Cross challenge on Crummer, and
Right.
the fact that she was very lucky to not have her foot planted while Cooney Cross made that challenge, because that, speaking of Crummer's unfortunate history with respect to injuries, like she could be fortunate in that one. The fact that her foot wasn't planted and Cooney Cross has lunged in like that, I remember jumping up out of my seat, like jumping up out of my chair. Sorry, in the box there, it was potentially nasty, but that goal, I don't know, like it was a bloody awesome goal. The fact that she saw Maisel off her line, and she, the thing about it, and something that you could see with the first goal, it was a bit of the buy a ticket, win the raffle kind of thing.
Well, so this is where Anto and I disagreed, because the equaliser for Raw has come in the 86th minute, and then they've scored twice more to win 4-2. The third goal, was Courtney Nevin back on the field, or was she still off being treated when the third goal hit the back of the net? Because I'm pretty sure Withers is the player that Tatham Burns past to give the assist.
Yeah.
And then the fourth goal was just a scramble in the box, and Ishinori, good goal. But Ante, I think that even down to 10 players, Alana Murphy was doing enough to crowd the space and be a defensive presence that when she left and was replaced by Emma Robers, and no disrespect to Robers, but I think came in instead of coming on with fresh legs, came in cold to a sense of the game, and you see her entering the frame well after Gorry's shot has left the boot. And I just think if Alana Murphy was still out there, Gorry doesn't necessarily have that space to take that shot. And without that equaliser, I'm not necessarily sure that Raw overrun victory the way they did.
I think by that point, I think it was it contributed, but I don't think it was necessarily the primary cause of not just the goal, but the fact that it was already a territory game by that point, and Victory were defending rather desperately in certain phases by the time that equaliser comes. And that's something that really struck me, because Brisbane, whenever Gorry does not have the ball, it's just panic. It's sheer panic, and it's not even the last resort. The only resort is basically just to spam that ball in behind. And we speak about, I speak about players who can provide oxygen, and you just see whenever Gorry doesn't have the ball, or it goes further and further away from her in possession, you see, Brisbane asphyxiating themselves. And that was something that really, that was something that kind of defined the first goal. And the fact that it was a blind pass going back to Bailey, and Bailey couldn't recover. But personally, I think it's not necessarily the space that Gorry was allowed, but the space that everyone else was allowed, which then impacted the space that Gorry was allowed, because Victory were kind of scrambling by that point. The goal itself, is it, a goal of, let's say, collective creation? No, it isn't. But I think after that second goal, Victory kind of exhaled. And that's kind of the thing that happens, let's say when you do no longer have something to defend and you're at a disadvantage numerically. I think that was telling as in the final stages of that game.
I mean, it felt like there was, instead of 4 minutes plus stoppage, it felt like there was another 20. It felt as though Raw were winning that game no matter what. It's not a surprise that they scored twice. Just back to your point on Cooney Cross, because Joey rightly on Twitter pointed out that if she's suspended for Friday's game against Newcastle, Victory's next match is against Wanderers on the 16th. Wanderers had their game postponed yesterday, another one that I lost, but no guarantee they'll be back by the 16th, but even if they are, the Matildas have their first game on the 21st, and we're assuming that Kyra is going to be...
So the next game is in the Asian Cup.
In a camp, yeah. But I personally think that Cooney Cross should not be considered for the Matildas until she can break in as a winger in the front three. because those are the positions she was playing that got everyone's attention to begin with. Her ability to dribble defenders, shoot on acute angles, score from acute angles by picking the right shot. I feel as though, as much as everyone loves to, give a golf clap every time she plays a nice diagonal ball, but shoehorning her into central midfield just so she can play for the national team, for me, that's not the answer. I would wait until she can play in the front three again.
As a midfielder, she's no different to the long line of second ball machines that we already have. I personally don't believe. Look, does she have the capacity to become, let's say, an above average, sitting midfielder? Possibly. But there are numerous accumulative details in how she plays deep in midfield that really don't sell me. The predominant one with me is just how reactive she is in movement. And she, let's say, when the ball is around her and the ball is possibly going to come to her in early phases of play, and she has to get the team up the pitch, it's not that she doesn't want the ball. I think it's that she reacts too late to play. And I'm not necessarily certain that she rectifies that either within a domestic level in Australia at Victory, or whether that even happens in the Matildas, because even after the World Cup, we haven't learned a thing with respect to our midfield. So I am very, very intrigued to see what happens at the Asian Cup if Cooney Cross is called up. But if she was to play midfield, she doesn't sit deep. She's like just a second ball, one of 2/8, and just provides energy. She's not going to think the game through or feel the game through.
I mean, it is going to be very interesting to see what happens with those selections for the Asian Cup, because I think we were discussing it in the chat, Teo. If you were to watch that game today in isolation, Victory versus Raw, and were to be told that the Victory was fielding a Matilda's centre midfielder and a Matilda's wing back, you probably would have said, you've made a mistake. The centre back's playing for Brisbane Raw. And if gun to your head, you had to make a guess, you probably would have pegged Doran as the Matilda's wing back playing for Victory, not Neville. Yeah, all right. I'm not going to lie.
However, you know what? There's something. Sorry to.
Based on that one game in isolation.
But even it's astounding just how composed and how much clarity Gorry has coming back this quickly coming back after such an extended period out of football. The fact that she has a processing capacity of football that, frankly, nobody else on the pitch had today. And, even the game in Redcliffe, she started that game and her ability to process the game was just far quicker than everyone else. And
same for the game in Canberra.
Yeah. And it's astounding just how just how high her base level is in football. Did she come up with a 10 out of 10 today? Absolutely not. Because you know what? There were moments in which she lazily got rid of the ball. And at the same time, I'm not necessarily certain she entirely trusts her teammates to give the ball to them. And so she'll look for Cromer. But yeah, I think Victory, as well as Brisbane, are highly volatile.
Just a question for you guys, very, very, very quickly.
Sorry,
it's two losses in a row now for Victory. I know today they went down to 10, but how do you guys see them, sort of managing, in terms of getting their best team out there to get results? Obviously, with Kayla Morrison out for the season, how do they address these defensive shortfalls? What do you guys want to see? Do you want to see a change of system? Do you want to see a change of personnel? Was today more in some areas with Amy Jackson playing in defence, something more that you think could work long term? I know they had no Alex Chidiac today. How do you guys see it?
Well, unlike Ante, talking about Wanderers, I'm not going to recommend getting mutual with 5 players. Might take shop that for another time. Really, Nick, I think it comes down to can they find a international
Replacement.
centre back to come in as a guest. Right now, the fixture will do them some favours. They haven't played Wellington yet. They haven't played Wanderers yet. They haven't played Canberra yet. They've basically got, they lost yesterday to a team that was on 1 point. But I do think they've still got some teams to play who they are ahead of in terms of even today's team player for player. I think they're heading for a semi-final exit or getting tipped into fifth if an Adelaide or a Perth or a Brisbane can actually string together the necessary winning streak to catch them. They might already have too many points in the bank, and have too big an advantage over some of these teams making a late run. So I don't think it's a formation change. I really think that right now they're making the 4, but they're crashing out to in that 3rd versus 4th final because it's a new finals format this season.
I think also what will be low-key important for them is if they can get Melina Ayres back healthy and actually firing on all cylinders, because what Ayres will offer them going forward is a touch of lethality. Like Melina Ayres is a quality finisher of the ball. She can score in areas that other players, especially on that Victory side, cannot. When you look at, especially considering that they only have Lynn Williams for one more game, potentially losing Kyra Cross, not just Kyra Cooney Cross, not just for the Asian Cup, but as Sam Lewis reminded me of in my mentions, potentially, depending upon what happens in the February international window, Cooney Cross might not come back. She might just stay with the Matildas set up through to the February international window. So they will need bodies moving forward. And Melina Ayres coming back will be important for that one. And I know, there's a lot of talk about the Asian Cup, and I think maybe what we might do, Teo, because we are running over time, what's for Teo and everybody in the chat, what we might do next week is we could take a look at our, Asian Cup squad if A-League women's form was the only factor involved in selecting the side, or something along those lines, or just in general who we want to see in the squad. I think that could be an interesting, but we did touch on it a bit before in Adelaide. They did play last night, yesterday as well. Adelaide 4, Perth Glory 2. Teo, it was a fun game, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. I think that, again, defensive issues, goalkeeping issues all read their ugly heads. I mean, Matilda Mcnamara's headed goal. Not one Perth Glory player, be it a defender or the keeper, moved or even unplanted their feet. So I think that Emily Condon's free kick was a great highlight, but there were suspect things for both teams, which suggests that, a bit like I said before, I don't think either of these sides are going to win the necessary number of games to catch Melbourne Victory because they're so suspect. They've got a defensive mistake in them. They've got a goalkeeping error in them that will stop them from going on a winning streak. I mean, Adelaide have got Canberra in Canberra next, I believe, and but prior to then, Perth are playing Canberra, I believe, in Wollongong. But I don't trust either team to get a winning streak going in order to catch Victory.
Especially if Sasaki is out for an extended period. Like this, she's very important for Adelaide.
Well,
in my opinion,
especially Ante, because I thought in the Canberra game, where she was playing a deeper role, still scored, still had an assist, but I thought she was a turnstile in midfield and lucky not to get sent off due to some of the fouls she committed by playing a position she doesn't normally play. Whereas she's had less defensive responsibility, be it Emma Stanbury starting or Dylan Holmes coming back in, which was the case at the weekend, and that's freed her to play in a more advanced role, and she is actually looking, really deadly as an attacking player. And then a lot of talk about Chelsea Dorber. I mean, her finish for the second goal, that one wasn't a goalkeeping error. That one was just a really good strike.
Good goal. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I'm of the agreement. Like I don't trust, especially Adelaide. I don't necessarily trust them to be able to catch Victory.
I don't trust Adelaide simply because they are Adelaide, and not playing finals is what Adelaide does.
Coming back to Victory, however, speaking of segueing, talking about the compatibility of role and the compatibility of composition. If Cooney Cross was to come back, I think you switch her and Chidiac. Chidiac is best deeper on the pitch.
Oh, 1000%.
Chidiac's not
Yeah.
a 10.
100%.
She's more press resistant than Cooney Cross. She will actually.
Yeah, more than most Australian midfielders, she has a capacity to get the team up the pitch. And not just that, but she's not necessarily explosive in a way that you kind of need closer to goal. Sorry, just an aside, and that's the kind of thing about Sasaki as well. She can really drive, in terms of dribbling, going up the pitch, and she's able to really power out of certain situations. I'm not totally against her playing as a 6, but I'm also of the agreement that you need a type like Dylan Holmes in front of her to be able to, let's say, shoulder defensive burden.
Wow. Perth Glory suffering their first loss of the season in that one, maybe asking why they can't play Brisbane Roar every week after defeating them in their opening 2 games of the season. But Lisa Devana not in the Glory side for this one, Teo, and I will admit I haven't seen anything. I checked the AAP reports. I haven't seen anything about what her prognosis is. But do you think? I know she's got a hamstring, as you put in the chat, but I'm not sure of what her recovery time is. I did report on the game where she injured it, but I think the question is, Teo, is it a case of no Devana, no Glory? Or do you think this side, Alex Aparkas in his second year with some good young talent, can find a way to win games without the Matilda in their ranks?
I think that Devana was icing on the cake, and they were actually already happy with the attackers that they'd recruited before Devana signed. I mean, we haven't seen 18 Keane, I think, in a matchday squad this season. Deborah Andela Harp came off the bench in this game, but has had limited minutes. Alani Anchevsky got the full 90, which is great. And even though her penalty wasn't great, it still scored and it still goes in the books. So, she continues to score goals. And they're going to be a high variance team because they've got so many players that are in their first season and have never done this before. And they're playing next games against Canberra, who themselves against Brisbane. I mean, I have been espousing the talents of Emma Ilioski as a potential fullback, sort of deputy to Ellie Carpenter. And she had her worst game in the A-League Women's against Brisbane. But again, it's an 18-year-old. It's a high-variance player who is going to have undulations in their performance through the course of the season. So, look, that's why I think Perth v Canberra is a coin flip, and I'm pretty excited that I'm commentating it because I genuinely don't know what to expect, and I'm going to learn a lot about both teams, and I think everyone watching it will learn exactly the same.
Well, it is an issue that we have been dancing around throughout this entire conversation thus far. So as we approach to the hour mark, I feel as though we might as well bring it up and address the elephant displaying flu-like symptoms in the room. COVID-19 chaos abounds in the A-League. The Australian Professional Leagues, the APL, appearing to be resolute in their desire to forge ahead and stage as many games as they can with what they have available to them, resistant to the idea of suspending the season and going into the hub, which you would have to say is in line with what our global standards at the moment. I saw a piece in The Age today where the Big Bash is potentially investigating a Victorian hub for its men's competition. But aside from that, it seems as though the A-Leagues, like most sporting competitions around the world, everybody's vaccinated who wants to be vaccinated now. There's finances have been stretched by these past 2 years. There simply is no appetite for hubs or season suspensions. I guess the question for you guys, and I'll go to you first on this, Nick DeMano, is that the right call in this situation in the face of Omicron?
I think it's an interesting one because it's comparing sort of the A-League situation to the BBL is very different. I think it's like apples and oranges because remember, you can literally play cricket games back to back. Like you see Melbourne Stars are playing today and they're playing tomorrow. So you can almost get a season away in a matter of days because the difference in between games, the time you don't need like 3 to 4 days to get players recovered and everything else, it's a bit different. I think the hub idea would have to be the absolute worst case scenario because I just think the league right now can't afford to be hemorrhaging that sort of money in that situation because it costs a lot. But Ant, I know you want to jump in, but just a spec.
That's fair.
I just think what the A-League should be looking at doing is if you can't get the games in the midweek situations right now, I know you still got to get the FFA Cup done too. You got to look at the idea of extending the season into June. I know they are so resistant against doing it, but if it's going to come at the expense of player welfare, being forced to play game after game after game, it's not worth it. If you got to play finals 2 weeks into June or towards the end of June like last season, we know that Channel 10 and Paramount are more open to extending the season beyond the end of May. You've got to take that. Like there's an open window for it. And to be honest, if it just means a few extra weeks of A-League football where, we're not seeing players wheeled out 3 days after playing a high intense game. And obviously when the teams start playing in the Asian Champions League as well, it's only going to exacerbate that. So for me, I think if you can't cram those games in sort of, in a reasonable time frame, you got to look at expanding into June. I think that for me is a real suitable idea as well. And also football in winter, for God's sake. Like it doesn't it just sound like a bit of a no-brainer?
I mean, it's just sorry, quick to jump in. It's interesting in what Nick's talking about. They're extending the season because yes, it's obvious that the leagues don't want to do that if they don't have to, but it's been interesting to observe in his comments to the Sydney Morning Herald, Danny Townsend vociferously against extending the season. We can't do it because of the AFC Under-23 championships coming up. Can't do it in what would be the first time ever an A-League club has cared about a junior international tournament that isn't even the Olympic Games. But then contrast that with Greg O'Rourke speaking to the Keep Up platform, doesn't rule it out and even says that it is a potential option. So we are seeing in there a potential, well, I'm not going to say clash because it's clear that they're in lockstep. This is a last resort. We don't want to do it. However, the operational side of things is at least willing to entertain the idea against what one might call the strategic commercial side of things. I don't know whether I'm reading far too much into it based upon one story in the Sydney Morning Herald and one story in Keep Up, but that is one thing that I've noticed about that conversation surrounding extending the season.
I think that kind of reaffirms the fact that, pardon the phrasing, but this is an evolving beast, and so we're going to have very fluid responses and reactions to such a thing. I wouldn't rule out a hub, and in like a multi-state hub, let's say teams between New South Wales and Victoria. I wouldn't rule that out, but personally, I would be against fixture congestion, and especially in a World Cup year where the World Cup isn't being played during the northern summer, absolutely extend the season. And I think especially something that was not only the fact that winter, is more conducive to playing football, the fact that there was such fixture congestion during the hub was something that was touched upon. The fact that it was primarily driven by Fox, and the commission was basically was asking to how high they had to jump. I'm pardon the language, or pardon the bluntness with respect to my interpretation of that. But
no, I mean it's true. Look at the grand final last year; it would not have happened when it did. Delta descending around us had the broadcasting deal not been ending later that week.
And so I'm if Paramount are, let's say, more receptive to the idea of extending the season, then I believe that that's the path that the league should be going down.
I mean, obviously, I have a conflict of interest in this, and also personal self-interest as well. So I'm not going to speak to the points that you guys have talked about. But what I will say is, when you go into the Paramount studio, everyone has to do a test, the nasal swab, and then spend 15 minutes sitting in a bay before they're allowed to go into the rest of the studio. And it really hits home when one of the guys, one of the sound guys fixing up monitors and adjusting what feed comes into which studio told me, yeah, I'm a leukemia survivor. If I get COVID, I'm probably going to die, And so I think that, I may have moved to Sydney, but all the people I talk to, well, for the most part, still live in Melbourne. And I haven't really changed a great deal from how I was living in lockdown in Melbourne, because I can't afford to get sick either. I can't afford, whether it's 2 weeks or a week. I mean, both the jobs I work are freelance casual. So there we go. Self-interest is creeping in. But my point is that people's health and the precautions that are being taken, it is being taken very seriously. And I think Parramatta is doing a lot of the right things in order to make sure that their workforce continues to go forward in a responsible manner.
Company man, Teo Filatieri.
Me and your co-worker should hang out, Teo. The two of us will, us immunocompromised cancer bros that could potentially die of COVID at any moment.
I just want to make a quick point about extending the season. And I know this is sort of putting on the hat of ratings and everything else, but wouldn't it be the best sort of time to capitalize in June for extending the season when, the AFL are taking buys in that period of time as well? Like, I know that that's sort of looking at it from a holistic standpoint, but there are some buys in June I've just pulled up the fixture right now, from the weekend of the 3rd into Queen's birthday into the 17th. Now, I know the finals format has changed with 2 legs over the semi-finals and a grand final, but this is now where you got to capitalize on this. Like, if you're, you can play on Queen's birthday if you want. You can play a semi-final on Queen's birthday. Like, why not? Like after the game across the road, you're going to get sort of that, just that natural buzz. I don't know. I know maybe I'm looking at it from oh my God, let's capitalize. Let's get the numbers up. But I can't help but do that. I'm a producer myself. I think about numbers. So you know what? Like that's sort of one thing that I reckon they should look at. Like, if you could think about extending it for 2 to 3 weeks, I'm all for it.
There we go. We have heard from Nick, literally Kevin Dunn, Dabano, the producer in the ranks. But now a special treat as I throw now to a man that has been watching silently a la Sting from the rafters. Hopefully hopefully he has put a shirt on or put pants on. I don't know how much clothes he was wearing when we were chatting before the game. But Nick Stoll, Nick, are you there? And do you have a point on this? There he is.
He's
put a shirt on. He's put a shirt on.
Do I have a point on this? I have a point that this has been going for an hour and 7 minutes, and we've had like 2 games in the last 2 weeks. How do you guys manage to extend out this podcast so much? It's the amount of times I was like, this is going to be the final point. This is going to be the final point. Unbelievable. Extend the season. Imagine if this pod gets extended even more. It's going to be 4 hours if we go into June. All right, that's my first point. Second point is I agree, extend the season. I don't agree do it because the AFL has buys. Look, I'm from Sydney. We don't care when the AFL is played. It makes no difference to us up here. Sydney FC fans don't care. Wanderers fans don't care. MacArthur fans, I've spoken to all 4 of them. They don't care. So it's all good. But I would just say, and thinking about like where we are right now in the summer of sport, like we got to stop caring about what any of the other sports are doing, because it makes no difference except ground availability. Like the A-League right now in summer, we're away from AFL, NRL. Is getting no coverage anywhere except for like the 95 different A-League podcasts that you can listen to. But it's
this one's the best one.
It's straight into tennis. Cricket's still, 5th test, whatever, 4th test. I don't know. Something's going on with that. But yeah, this whole idea that we can like sneak in between the mainstream media, I just don't think it's going to make a big impact. But I would say overrated. Yeah, I would say extend it. I just think like in terms of like numbers and stuff, I think that's like a long-term problem as opposed to this is like a short-term problem. We just need to fix like when we can get games in.
I'm not saying that extend it for just the reason that the AFL
it's a tangential.
Just make that very clear. I'm just saying it's an opportunity in winter when. Yes, I'm just saying.
Who is Australia's Ron Barassi that we can have crushing the AFL ball on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald? Just to symbolically show that we're invading the territory.
No, Gus Gould.
Mark Boswell.
Guess which member of the national curriculum used to host an AFL show on Channel 31?
This guy.
If I speak.
Okay, but maybe to placate the recently joined Nick Stoll, we can talk a bit more football because midweek there was an FFA Cup game. Melbourne Victory. Well, I guess they're not quite Melbourne Victory youth, but they are Melbourne Victory seconds. I don't know. An understrength Melbourne Victory side avoiding the prospect of a cup set to NPL Queensland side Gold Coast Knights, coming from behind to win 2-1 thanks to a 96th minute goal from Will Wilson. This coming, of course, after they survived a scare against Adelaide City with a penalty that won them the game with the last kick of the game. So they do tend to like to live dangerously in these sorts of games, but at the same time, difficult to know to take a lot out of the game in. Yes, we will get to the other thing that trended on Twitter in a sec, but different to take a lot out of the game for Melbourne Victory as a whole, given the massive changes in personnel associated with it. But I think we can put to bed any rumors or innuendo that Robbie Cruz can't run out a full game, given the amount of sheer cardiovascular effort he put into that one, can't we?
Okay.
You have to direct
so he
the question.
played.
Joey.
He
Even though it's an hour and 10 in, you still have to direct the question to somewhere.
He played 120 minutes at a high capacity, was their most consistent mover on and off the ball in both attacking and defensive phases. And that's not just innuendo outside of the club. That's inside the club as well. And I just don't understand how Brimmer can start ahead of Cruz.
My
Can they not start
only
in the
thing
same
is
team?
untaken. Oh, sorry, go on.
They can start together. Sorry, just in answer to Stoll's question, they can start together, but that would mean missing one of Berlanti and Ray Martin.
Mark San, member of the Communist 11.
I was gonna say, Ante, is it a matter of that Cruz could play that like a full 90, but could he do it off a 3-day break? If the fixtures do get congested, or could you see it in a situation where you play 90 and then 1 week sit out, or would it be sort of a situational thing that maybe you're playing against Melbourne City or you're playing against one of the obviously better teams in the league, and you wheel out Robbie Cruz in a game like that, or how do you see it?
I'm viewing it within the prism of the fact that Victory at this point playing 1 game a week. And so if you're playing 1 game a week, Cruz should be starting ahead of Brimmer as, let's say, the second striker. Him and Margiotta look for each other. It's quite evident that they gravitate towards each other. And, smart players gravitate towards smart players. And that was the same thing that we saw with Toivonen when Toivonen was the number 9 for Melbourne Victory. He loved playing with Robbie Cruz from the minute they started playing together. And Robbie Cruz, if they are playing 1 game a week, but then again, if they're not playing 1 game a week, fine, rotate.
There's been a question from the audience on Jake Brimmer. Ivan Stragan asks if Jake Brimmer continues his current form, and he's tagged him in this post, so be careful with your answer. Does he make the next national team squad?
No.
Joey, I'm going to throw it to you because that's what a post does.
That way. Wait, that way.
Stop. No, he doesn't. I don't see I just don't see Graham Arnold picking him, quite frankly, over some of the options that are in and around that Socceroos side, both in terms of the players that Graham Arnold prefers to have in those sides. And
he's got Rogic, Moy, Rustic. No, that's a step up. He's not getting there. Yeah,
he's not. He's not getting in the side as of yet. So, no, I don't see it happening.
I'd say if anyone's a realistic chance of a midfield selection from the A-League, it's probably Connor Metcalf.
Well, given that Arnie has already called him up, yes, I would agree. And there is the possibility he's not. He is not in the A-League anymore, but there is. Also, a chance that I think Nathaniel Atkinson could get a call up, and not necessarily as a wing back to the Socceroos.
Yeah, I'm not feeling that.
I'm not.
At international level, Nathaniel Atkinson as a winger. Oof.
I'm saying this based upon my assessment of the esteem he is held upon in the national team's roles he has played in the past. But yeah, I could see. I mean, to be honest, looking at this Melbourne Victory side, if I had to pick one player that Graham Arnold was most likely to call up from this Melbourne Victory side, it'd be Brillante to play as one of his double pivot. Once again, this is me predicting.
I know,
Graham
Arnold.
Arnie
We're trying to brain think here. We're trying to brain think here, but yeah. Personally, yeah. If anyone's even remotely close to getting called up, or not remotely, if anyone's close to getting called up or realistic to getting called up from Victory, if they're fit, I think it's still just Economides.
Yeah.
I think, based on that FA Cup game, that if anyone should be called up to the Socceroos, purely on the narrative basis, it's Scott McDonald. Because I love seeing player managers. That was the best thing about that game. You can tell me anything else. Anytime there's a player manager, that is the most fascinating thing in the world to me. The dynamics of the game, of a manager choosing when to sub themselves in, how the other players react to them coming into the game, when they pass in the ball, how he then starts pointing. And it's an incredible thing to watch. I wish it happened all the time. I think there should be one round of the A-League every year, which is player manager, right?
And then there was
manager selection. I think it'd be hilarious.
Then it was after 5 minutes, Muratovic ends up going into midfield anyway. But seeing them play together in the same way they did, for that short time in Brisbane, they're just fun. They're just fun players to watch, man. That was
and if they had got that
they
late equalizer,
they almost had them too.
Oh, that, I mean, we take the piss out of the magic of the cup kind of thing. That would have been absolutely awesome. And just one quickly kind of point on that game is one thing I kind of really like about the FA Cup is, and I think Josh raised this point a while back on the show, talking about when you watch the A-League, and with all the greatest respect, not every game feels like it matters. There's a lot of games that just kind of go by and you can, I missed it. Oh, what happened? Oh, who cares, right? And that's true across a lot of leagues. That isn't exclusive to the A-League, but obviously without relegation, that's further emphasized. One thing I love about the FA Cup, whenever it is A-League team versus non-A-League team, it always feels like it matters. It feels like it matters, especially for Gold Coast Knights, who, is a fantastic kind of night for them. And especially, it sounds like they made a lot of money at the food stall selling $10 chips and $4 Coke. So shout out to them. Great bit of finance. But also, I just think it matters, I think, for the entire NPL community whenever they see their club go up against an A-League club. And in turn, it matters to the A-League club to not be embarrassed like Wanderers were against Arpia, because that's, so far the humiliation of the season. So I did really enjoy that about that game. It felt like it mattered. And that needs to happen more.
Well, I mean, further to Nick's point, the one thing that Victory got out of this game more so than progression was their youth teams managed to get promoted 2 divisions and get immunity from relegation. Oh, wait. No. So I'm going to mute myself. I refuse to take, I am on Team FOF, the greatest A-League game I ever commentated. Adelaide coming back from 3-0 down to win 4-3. It was me and FOF. I'm not going to involve myself in any slander of this great man. I'm muting you guys. Don't get me sacked, please.
Don't get fired. Don't get fired.
Listen, I'm going to say, obviously, there was a lot of discussion about this. First things first, I posted something about this on Twitter, and I'm willing to defend my position on this. I vehemently disagree with Meredith's proposition that A-League youth sides should be parachuted into the top tier of their local NPL competitions and given immunity from relegation. I think that is pretty much self-defeating. The entire point of putting these young players in the NPL is that they are supposed to be going up and playing week in and week out against grown men in games that matter, going up against men whose paycheck rides on this game. If you give A-League youth sides immunity from relegation, the games don't matter. Because if the A-League youth sides are immune from relegation, those games cannot be played played for points. You cannot have one side winning the league based on goal difference from putting 8 goals past an A-League youth side that didn't field a proper team that week because they're immune from relegation anyway, and the senior coach wanted a few more extra bodies around training that week. You can't have that for competitive balance. The NPL, National Premier Leagues do not exist to serve the needs. Yes, okay, technically, yes, they do exist to serve the needs of the A-League franchises because of the whole skewed perspective of Football Australia's priorities.
We disagree on the way they are supposed to serve the needs. We think it should be via eventual pro-rel and an open pyramid, as opposed to simply being a shopping mall for the A-League teams to come and take whichever player takes their fancy.
Yes, basically, sides in the NPL and the state leagues have given up enough to support the A-Leagues across the past decade and a half. Enough. At some point, A-League, as Paul Mavrudis posted on Twitter, if A-League sides want their youth teams to play in a competition where they can just play for playing's sake and be immune from relegation, they can set up their own closed league. They can potentially call it the Y League or something similar. Having said that, yes, I vehemently disagree with Nick Meredith on that point. I will also like to point out that, yes, sometimes commentators may overdo it. There may be a case of they say too much, but it should also be taken into account that commentating football games is incredibly difficult. I mean, we might be spoilt here in this chat because we regularly do a podcast with, he's muted so he can't disagree with me, the best commentator in Australian football, a man that makes it look easy. But commentating, as somebody that commentates games in the NPL, I call the NPL quite a bit, which is an inside reference. It is incredibly difficult.
You asshole.
You know what good commentators don't do? Inside references.
References.
This is a podcast, so I can get away with it.
No.
Commentary. Shut up, or I'll break out the wrestling references again, Stoll. Commentary is incredibly hard work. You need to balance this fine art of doing enough research and having enough insight and information at your fingertips that you can realistically fill up every second of dead air that exists in the game, every second of air, but also know that that's not your job and that you don't need to do it. You need to balance doing all of the work, knowing that on a good day, you will be sharing 10% of it and just calling the game. And there is everything else. There is player recognition. There is knowing the form, reading the game, trying to provide an actual insight into the game that the viewers don't have, in educating the viewers of the game about the product that they are witnessing and giving them a new insight. So it's incredibly hard. And I don't think there is enough recognition. I think a lot of people kind of watch commentary. Oh yeah, I could do that. I'll watch a whole bunch of football. But then do it. If you think that, then sign up in your local NPL and do that. Yeah.
But also there is a difference, a subtle difference, but a difference between the play-by-play commentator, whose name I forget who it was, whoever that guy was, but good for him. And with respect. And the second thing was that Meredith is the expert commentator. Also was doing sideline, which was kind of a weird role, which I guess only comes up because it's the FA Cup and COVID and it's hard to travel. And I don't know what the issue was, but that was his role. He is not my cup of tea for a sideline commentator or expert commentator, but that's okay because many people in the world of football aren't my personal cup of tea. And I know that, for example, if I was to ever do that, I definitely wouldn't be their cup of tea. What I think is what I don't like to see is basically massive piles on, like just people piling on this one person. And while I, disagree with this commentator and look, many other commentators around the world, I just kind of, it feels a bit weird when everyone starts piling on, when this guy's trending on Twitter, when, maybe, I don't know if officially, but it felt like the A-League account, or sorry, the FA Cup account was taking a swipe at him with a GIF that they put up. It felt like Melbourne Victory's account was taking a swipe, and you're an official club account. Like, I know it's like some 25-year-old admin like behind the thing, and I've done social media jobs and it's kind of fun to be funny and stuff, but you're still speaking on behalf of the club, you're still speaking on behalf of the competition. And that's when I just feel like, I don't think you should be making fun of like your own commentators. I also think this is a structural issue of, I don't mind an old guy complaining about the price of chips at the stadium if he is not the only expert commentator there. If he's one of 5, to me that's much more interesting. And then you can have someone, providing kind of a higher analysis of what is happening on the field. But I don't mind in the 34th minute if they just cut to someone and he's like, man, do you know the price is here? This is ridiculous. Everyone's getting ripped off. Like, that to me would be a fun part of commentary. So I think there is a structural thing where I think of, really good commentary around the world. There's usually more than kind of 2 people doing it. And that's when I think you get in trouble, because there's no one, the guy, Campbell Johnson, someone has told me what his name was, the commentator, he's a young commentator. I don't know if, he can start an argument with Merida to go, well, Nick, I don't know what you're talking about. They're not playing like that at all. A la the way that, Speedy and Bozza once famously did. And what a disaster that became. So I don't know. My point is, I think part of it is structural. I didn't love the pylon, even though I didn't particularly agree with any of the comments, except $10 for hot chips is too much.
Personally, look, I can't say that I haven't ever been a part of something like that on Twitter from an individual standpoint.
No, I think totally. I think we all have.
And look, I understand that we can't. It's hard to remove context from this situation, given the subject. And look, I remember telling you guys during the game, it was like Nick Merida reminds me of Clint Eastwood in Gran Torino. It's all well and good, but the thing is, official accounts shouldn't be doing that shit. And not just official accounts, but the fact that Channel 10 liked some of those tweets as well, like the Channel 10 social media account liked some of those tweets. That's not a good look. At the same time, however, I think there is a very vast dissatisfaction with the level of commentary overall in Australian sport. Anyone, you could have been watching the Ashes and it would have been the same shit. Teo, you're an exception. Personally, I believe that you're the best football commentator in the country. And the fact that you haven't been, and I know this is all kind of a circle jerk right now, but the fact that you aren't already more prominent is ridiculous. And the thing is, soccer isn't immune to this, but soccer as a sport is different to the Boom Crash Opera, or should be different to the Boom Crash Opera. We should have better commentators, better analysis, which translates to better content. But I think producers in this country like to be a very safe. Very, very safe. And it's just easier to have names. And that's been the one thing that's really struck me about the 10 deal. Teo, you're an exception again. But
you're not a name, Teo. No one had heard of you.
You're not a name. You're not part of the name recognition index here.
Me and Teo were just doing games on a cold Monday night. You're not a name if you're doing that.
By the way, I'll say Campbell Johnson isn't a name, evidently.
It's a repackaged Fox. And that how can the soccer public be satisfied with that?
Just a quick thing. I'll try keep this on as short as possible. First of all, I think just from a human standpoint, public pylons on social media are just not on. I just think it's just a shit move. Just because it looks cool to jump in and shit on someone online, and everyone else is doing it. It's like the old cliche that we've been told since we've been kids. Everyone else is jumping off the bridge. Why are you doing it as well? Why would you do that? Because it's, because you want to be seen like you're part of the pack. It's just kind of like, all right, we get it. You said some stuff you don't agree with. Don't be a shit bloke about it, or don't be a shit person about it, full stop. I just think, it's, look, you can agree with him. You can not agree with him. but that's that. Like, and as you said, Ante, when it's coming from official accounts, the look. I know that the social media person is not reflecting the entire company. He's not the CEO, he's not the board of directors, but in a public sphere, he is, or she is, or, in that situation, that account is representing, because that's what the people see. They see 10 Football liked this tweet and they go, all right, well, it might have been an accident. We don't know that. The admin might have accidentally pressed it and realized, oh my God, it didn't come from my personal account. But either way, it's still in your bio. People are still going to know. So I just think, in terms of commentary standards, you mentioned a really good point there, Ante, about names. In my opinion, the best commentators, you included, Teo, are the people who have come from working from underneath and have worked really hard to get to that, and they're not necessarily former players or come in this sort of different, like you get what I'm saying. Like, you look at it in the AFL, like some of the best commentators aren't former players. You look at it in the NBL. I might be biased in saying this because I am his producer, but Jack Heverin in the NBL.
Yes,
sensational
absolutely.
Commentator. Brilliant. One of the best. Doesn't get enough credit for it. Teo as well in the A-League. Like, we need to give more opportunities. Just putting it bluntly, we need to give more opportunities to different people, because there are some bloody good people working their ass off. There's a second person in this call as well who it's pretty obvious who it is, in the name of Joey Lynch, but that we need to see more opportunities because we need to expand the pool. We need to see more people getting that opportunity and getting that chance in front of more eyeballs, because it just needs to evolve. We need to get to a point where professionalism gets better. I think we need more courses for this sort of stuff as well, more training around this sort of stuff too, for everybody, because I think it will only get better if you're having more of that sort of stuff, and that's just my opinion.
The NPL is a bit like, let's say, for any aspiring, let's say, commentator or anyone looking to get their chops, the NPL is the best place to go.
Oh yeah.
Irrespective of,
It is.
The work.
Turning up 26 or 30 weeks a year to the NPL is a far better education than a standalone course that you do like it's a uni subject. Just to finish this discussion, Richard Hines, writer for Nine Fairfax, I believe, is still his employer. Every time Jason Bennett does the footy, every time Alistair Nicholson gets a big, high-profile, big bash game, and then due to COVID got to do the Ashes for the Boxing Day test, he's a great barometer of, sort of the everyman that loves the non-boys club commentator that's kind of, earned his stripes. And I think that rather than me say it, I'd rather just paraphrase Richard Hines to say exactly your point, Nick, that there are those people out there that are working their way up. But look, I think I survived. I think we've got through Media Watch. Here's the thing. To my credit, I didn't tell you to dump it from the show. It did cross my mind, but
However, there was another one. Sorry to go on with this, but there was another one from the A-League's account that was very questionable. And
what was that tweet?
Today, during the Victory Brisbane A-League Women's game.
Yeah, they showed the banner from active fans.
Basically, the Victory account tweeted out a picture from Lynn Williams' bundled-chested efforts. From looking at it, it appeared to have crossed the goal line. And the A-League Women's official account quote tweeted it with a picture of Victory fans holding up their famous banner. The line has been crossed.
Can I again segue into our next segment, because I would love to see goal line technology as we know it in the Premier League, in A-League Women's, and it really hits home when Mackenzie Hawkesby scored this hat-trick against Wellington, and Andy Howe tweets out, Hawkesby is the second youngest A-League Women's player to score a hat-trick behind only Sam Kerr. And I can't help but think back to Remy Simpson, who had a ball cross the line quite clearly for what would have been a hat-trick last season against Canberra. But of course, no goal line technology assistant referee missed it. And so instead of her being on that list of record youngest hat-trick scorers, it's not there because it wasn't a goal. So I would love to see goal line technology come in, because I don't think Lynn Williams's attempt across the line today, and I'm not convinced by the angles of the photos. No, I'm not. My depth perception isn't brilliant, but I'm not convinced that it had crossed the line.
Can I just also make a point on the Twitter accounts and because it does feel like the A-League club accounts have gone into a bit of a new direction. I think maybe
it feels like a very deliberate policy direction to appeal to the youth market.
But So this is the thing, right? So we've seen it happen a lot with the kind of the German clubs. I think were the first ones. The German in English, obviously first. I think there was, and I think Italian clubs have done it, and then eventually, kind of all the clubs picked it
Now
up.
it's the Russians that are spearheading it. And they're the
Spartak Moscow, man, with the Slav vibes, man.
But do you guys like
on the
do you-
TikTok as well?
Look, I find it funny every now and again, but do you guys think it actually increases their popularity?
I actually
Is there any tangible benefit?
This is the thing. The best tangible benefit there is to a club is actually fucking functioning on the pitch. Pardon my language. Like, just play well. Like everyone, and you think about Roma. Roma's trophy cabinet is just their social media account. They're just a clown club. Like, people don't take Roma seriously, and that's contributed to by their social media.
That's exactly what I was going to say. There's only one AS Roma, and all the copycats have just become annoying. I almost think it's at the point where if you had a social media strategy, what you should do is have your official club account represent your brand, and then your social media manager on the sly, on their burner phone, can have as many fan accounts or the equivalent of A-League memes as they want, but still run it from inside the building like it's an official account, but no one actually knows that it's run by the club. I would love to see that level of sort of just protection of the brand, because ultimately, I don't want your bants. I want the news. I want to know what the starting 11 is. And that look, I'm about to turn 36, so this does make me a curmudgeon who is out of touch. I'm not on TikTok. I don't have Snapchat. So maybe I've fallen behind the curve on what the youth considers to be social media. But Twitter is still my main source of news. And so I don't want to, and I think where it tipped over was when Leeds went at Karen Carney last year from their club account, because, it was banter, and then it crossed the line and became abuse and, as you mentioned, a pile-on. And she was the recipient of that, regardless of whether I disagree with her point about Bielsa and Leeds or not. It got really unsavory really quickly. So,
I mean, I can just add my 2 cents as a working journalist. In the current age where Paramount and 10play do not have a pause and rewind function on their streams, I would very much appreciate it if A-League clubs would tweet out exactly what happened during play, simply so I can go back and check. Simply texting out the name of a goal scorer plus a few emojis and a GIFs doesn't really give me any sort of information that I don't already have. So yeah, that will be okay. Nick, you've got 30 seconds to say one more thing before we get back to the resolutions.
As the youngest person in this call right now,
you ruined it.
All I can just say is just really small. It just depends on the platform you're using. If you're using something like TikTok, you can be a little bit more lighthearted and a bit more, go into the bands. But as you said, Tay, if you're on Twitter, you need to tread that fine line. And sometimes there are people that just want to see the starting lineup. And I know, especially with my American sport, I want to see who's bloody playing, because every day, all I'm seeing is a player being rubbed out by COVID. So all I want to know is that. So with TikTok, like Spartak Moscow do, I'm all for the bans. So,
well, I mean, as the resident expert on the platform in this podcast, Nick, what would you say the acceptable strategy is for club Tinder accounts?
Lots of shooting. Lots of shooting.
That's it.
No.
He just left that door open and I had to walk through it. But we are now deep we are now deep into injury time. So, Teo, I'm assuming your New Year's resolution for the A-Leagues was goal line tech for the competitions?
Yes, and my New Year's resolution for Australian football broadly is that we get full NPL seasons in every state and every age group. The game cannot afford to keep missing out on full seasons, and the underrated undercurrent of it all is juniors not getting to play. So please, New Year's resolution, full state league, NPL, community seasons, but particularly the NPL. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, moving on. Nick DeBarno, what is your new resolutions for the A-Leagues and or Australian football?
Don't shit the bed in qualifying. That's one thing. That's all I want to see. I just don't want to see Australia shit the bed. I really hope that, obviously, as an Australian, we'll hope they make the World Cup. So, yeah, just hopefully at least just, don't crap. We don't want to repeat of 2017. And, yeah, That's really, and also if we have to extend the bloody season, that's my New Year's resolution.
There we go. Ante Jukic, what is your New Year's resolution for the A-Leagues and/or Australian football?
Tied to both Teo and Nick. I do want more minutes for kids at all age groups, and for the NPL seasons and community seasons to be able to be played this year. I do want, I'd like Australia to qualify for the World Cup. That'd be nice. I'm 1 out of 2 at the moment. I'd like 2 out of 2. But tied to that, just show some fucking balls. Like, just have some, like, give these kids a chance. Quite simply, give them a chance. Don't just play the kids who can run and who can run the fastest and longest and who are the strongest. Like, show some kids who can play football. Give them scope.
There we go. Ante appealing for Australian football to channel its inner Diego Simeone and find the cojones. Nick Stoll, what is your New Year's resolution for the A-Leagues and/or Australian football?
I read a thing today. I was looking at some old articles and stuff, and there was this one line that I really liked, which was "Hope is not a strategy." And I feel like there are so many, everything in Australian football. A lot of the strategy is hope. We hope that the A-League will become popular. We hope that the W League or the A-League women's will continue to, we hope that we'll get the NPL clubs will just magically become up to second division standard and then, be professional standard. We hope that we qualify for the World Cup, but it's not a strategy. And I would just love that everyone at every kind of level of the professional game, anyone who's basically getting paid, is asking, what is the strategy? How are we executing it? And it cannot be, look, we hope that it's going to be all right.
Sorry, you know what? Tied to that point, I'm very much of the belief that it's like Neymar, 1% possibility, 99% faith.
Faith, yeah.
With respect to like the decisions that go into actually having a tangible plan.
And also with that, it's just like, I guess as well, maybe as fans, maybe ask for something a little bit more than hope. Oh, we just need to stay positive. Let's hope it all works out. It's not going. Like, unless pressure is put. Like, look at the Wanderers. Great example. Oh, we hope the Wanderers get back to winning ways. We hope. Where's the strategy? What is, like...
What's the plan?
Yeah, so, I don't know. I would just love that all people keep that in mind going into 2022.
I think, so for my resolutions, I would echo the sentiments of many already throughout this pod, in that we see a full year of national Premier Leagues and community football across the country, as Teo touched upon, not so much so that the established senior players can get a gig and we can do all these streams and all of that, so that 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds that last played a full season when they were 6, 7, 8 years old actually get a chance to once again run around the park with their mates, learning,
have some fun.
Have some fun. Not even, who gives a stuff if they turn into Socceroos or not, but, having fun, learning life lessons, forging connections that will last a lifetime, falling in love with football, so that even if they don't turn into players, they turn into a generation of fans, journalists, administrators, or maybe just the parents of future fans or future players. That is important. On the subject of youth, yes, for Australian football to figure out what exactly its developmental pathways look like in this country. No, we have no idea what the actual artist formerly known as the Y League, now known as the A-League Youth, actually looks like. We haven't heard anything beyond the name change about it since the APL took over. Very much hoping that whatever is going to be happening with that is revealed soon, and that we get a proper insight into what A-League youth sides in the National Premier Leagues will look like. Obviously not being parachuted into the first tier and immune from relegation. Also, that we get tangible progress towards a national second division introduction at some point soon. But more importantly for me, I think with that is that we get work towards a national second division in which might be a forlorn hope on my part, but that in which all parties and which all stakeholders are actively working together in good faith for the good of Australian football, where it is not used. I know it's just
Just read the room, Joseph.
Yeah. It's not used as a point scoring exercise. It's recognized for the benefits that it can bring Australian football. And the mindset is adopted as to not why it won't work, but why not? And what can we do? What is good enough, not what is perfect.
I like it.
So,
Instead of the Y League, the Why Not League.
Pretty much. There we go. You can put that on a t-shirt, Nick Stoll. We can start selling TNC merch. Yeah, so those would be, and for the women's game, once again, figuring out what the pathways are, figuring out how we can institute a systems where we can not just identify a select cohort of girls and have them in an elite pathway, but figuring out how we can get all girls coming up into elite pathways where they can be in proper systems year round, and we open it up and we are producing not just a select individual group of players, but a cavalcade of talented youngsters coming through that can realistically target football as a career moving forward. So indeed.
Can I raise one last point before we go? I know I was complaining about this show going long and I've extended it out by 20 minutes. 2022 World Cup year. Have you guys ever been less excited for a World Cup year?
No.
Never in my life.
My teams haven't qualified yet, Nick. There's a big sense of dread right now about the next few
even
months.
if they do, I'm just not excited. Like,
I'm
it's a
still
World Cup.
kind of excited.
It's a World Cup, so I'm always excited. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, as soon
Let's
as
revisit in 10 months, I reckon.
yeah, as soon as the games come, I'll be pumped. But
yeah,
but
No,
like,
Nick, I actually
2010
am.
for me was whatever.
I am to the point where I'm frustrated that it's in December and it's the rhythm of it means it's further away.
it doesn't
But
feel
like-
like a World Cup year.
I feel like I should be much more excited for this, knowing that it is the last with 32 teams before it
Yeah.
expands, and
That's-
potentially it is the last one that has had a 4-year gap preceding it. I should be a lot more excited and waiting in anticipation for it, but I'm just not because of
There's a lingering lament of what lies ahead.
There's a lingering lament about what lies ahead and what this could have been had it simply gone to a more suitable place. That didn't force a complete upheaval, that every country on earth are bastards, but some are worse than others. And,
So on that cheery note, thanks for listening to the National Curriculum.
Let's go.
I tell you what, though, when Messi wins it, I'm going to say, "What a World Cup it was!"
You know how great
Unbelievable.
Modric's last dance is going to be this year, man?
Wasn't the Euro supposed to be Modric's last dance?
It was supposed to be, but it wasn't. That's why he's going to come back. We got robbed by Spain.
Listen, fellas, I'm just going to say linear progression is a thing. World Cup semi-final, European final.
Yeah, people thought that
Group
about
stage
Italy in
exit.
'98.
Group stage exit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk ourselves into Qatar, Brazil as the final, but it's going to take a bit of getting used to.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we have been
Asian
going
Cup,
for far. We have been going for far too long now. You have been listening to the National Curriculum, the first of what will be, hopefully, many editions of the pod/video pod for the year 2022. My name has been Joey Lynch. I have been joined by Teo Blazeri, who we have christened as the best commentator in Australian football. If you don't agree with us, doesn't matter. You're wrong. Nick Dabano, Ante Jukic, the late edition Nick Stoll. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us. Tip your waiters and waitresses. We will be back next week with another edition of the National Curriculum.